August 22nd, 1987. The outskirts of Melbourne in Australia. Suburb of Lower Plenty. While autumn is approaching in the rest of the world, winter is ending in Australia, so it's still relatively cold in the southern city. About 4 o'clock in the morning, Saturday. A time when most families are at home and fast asleep. But in this early morning, a masked man is hiding near one of the houses. After removing the glass from the living room window, the criminal sneaked inside into his parents' bedroom, armed with a knife and a pistol. He woke them up and, threatening, began to rummage through things for show. Then, ordering the parents to roll over on their stomach, the criminal tied their hands and feet together with a C-knot, so that they could not escape. He blindfolded everyone, sealed their mouths with tape, which he brought with him, and locked them in the closet under threat of death. After that, the criminal went to the other rooms. In the next bedroom, the 6-year-old son of the family was woken up by the attacker, but remained unharmed. The masked man blindfolded the boy and taped his mouth, and then tied him to his own bed. After that, he made his way into the next bedroom of the 11-year-old daughter of the family. She was his true target. For the next 2 hours, the masked criminal took breaks in his perverted sexual pleasures and wandered around the family's house, even stopping at some point to cook himself a meal. After spending most of this time sexually harassing a poor 11-year-old girl, this mysterious psychopath left the house with a box of classical records and a blue jacket stolen from the family. So began the legend of Mr. Rule, who created an Australian monster that decades later will haunt parents and their children. After the attack on the family in Lower Plenty, the police arrived there to investigate the crime. But she was at a dead end. This attack didn't seem to have been provoked, and the family didn't have any real enemies to suspect. The crime didn't fit in with any of the other solved cases in the area. In the late 1980s, Melbourne had a reputation for being a safe place, the most livable city in the world. So many citizens call it unofficially. Although violent crimes still occur within its borders, their level is lower than in many other places. So, the police began to investigate the attack. Parents tied up, gagged, and then locked in their own closet. The son was tied up, gagged, blindfolded, and then tied to the bed. The daughter was physically assaulted for several hours, during which the suspect searched the house and then disappeared, with a collection of records and a jacket. More details became known when investigators focused on the interrogation of the daughter, and she told the police that during one of the breaks, the perpetrator used the home phone to call someone else. On the phone, the man demanded from the person on the other end of the wire to transfer his children. Otherwise, they will be next. And he called this man Bozo. When the police checked the family's phone records, they were surprised to see that, in fact, there was no such call. It turned out later that it was Mr. Cruel's handwriting. He liked to throw up distractions like that to confuse the investigators. Fortunately, more than a year passed before the criminal struck again. Unfortunately, this perverted person will start a terror that will make parents and children live in fear. December 27, 1988. A few days after Christmas, when most families are still enjoying the holiday, one family is about to experience the scariest day of their lives. John Wills, his wife and 4 daughters were sleeping in their home in the Ringwood area, just a few miles from where the previous crime took place more than a year ago. John was fast asleep when, around 5:45 in the morning, he woke up from the touch of a cold object on his temple. "Don't be a hero," a voice ordered him. And for John, the worst parental nightmare began. The masked intruder, wearing dark blue overalls and blue ski masks, held a gun to John's head. He was holding a knife in his other hand, and John realized that resisting meant risking the lives of the whole family. John and his wife were ordered to roll over on their stomachs, as in the first crime. They tied his wrists and ankles with copper wire. The same type of node, specialized, which was used mainly by sailors, was still used. Then they blindfolded him and taped his mouth shut, as before. And then the attacker assured them that he came here only for money. A masked man stole about $35 from the family's bedside table, and then went around the house and cut the telephone wires. After making sure he had a head start, he headed to the bedroom shared by the family's 4 daughters. Addressing 10-year-old Sharon Wills by name, this man woke up a sleepy 10-year-old girl, and then blindfolded her and sealed her mouth, just like her parents. He stopped to take a few items of her clothing and then took her away. It took the parents about 15 minutes to get out of the shackles, and when they finally did, they realized that their eldest daughter was missing. Since the telephone wires were cut, John had to run to the neighbors to use their phone. After that, he began to search the neighborhood in a panic. Unfortunately, his search was in vain and yielded nothing. 10-year-old Sharon Wills was nowhere to be found, and this family's nightmare was just beginning. For more than 18 hours, the Wills family was in a state of panic, worried that their 10-year-old daughter had been taken away from them forever. After midnight, an unknown woman stumbled upon a small figure standing on a street corner, wrapped in green garbage bags. It was Sharon Wills, abandoned by the kidnapper. Despite the terrible trauma that had just befallen her, the 10-year-old girl was in a surprisingly cheerful mood, calm and collected. "My name is Sharon Wills," she told the woman, "and I was taken away from home early in the morning. Some man left me here and told me to go and call home." The woman who found her called the police and contacted the Wills family. An investigation into the attack has begun, and here we found some amazing evidence. Or rather, their absence. Sharon was blindfolded throughout the abduction, so she could not give a description of the attacker's appearance. But she described him as a quiet, rather harsh man who actually seemed to care somewhat about his victims. This, of course, contrasted sharply with the egregious crime that had occurred. But the investigators took note of this. One of the words used to describe him was gentle, which was especially shocking. During a short captivity, Sharon was apparently fed a sandwich and given milk and lemonade to drink before she was released. The criminal not only carefully washed off all kinds of evidence that he left behind, but also cut her fingernails and toenails, brushed her teeth with a brush, and much more. The kidnapper either kept or threw away her clothes, not wanting any forensic evidence to lead to him. He then dressed her in a set of garbage bags before leaving her on the grounds of Bywater High School, just a few miles from her house. Investigators compared this incident with a previous incident, but for some time did not disclose the details of the incident. The atmosphere of fear began to heat up, and the criminal was nicknamed the Hampton Rapist. 4 weeks and months after the attack, the Wills family lived in a state of fear. The parents, along with their 4 daughters, began sleeping together in the living room, refusing to sleep in separate bedrooms for months. They installed a security system and even got a golden retriever. John Wills, in particular, took the attack very hard. He began to wonder what he could have done that would have changed the course of the attack or saved his daughter from all this horror. He didn't have an answer, and he just had to hope that the police would eventually find his daughter's abductor. Unfortunately, the investigation to find the culprit has reached a dead end. Very little evidence has been left or has ever been found, and none of them could be used to search for one particular person. One piece of evidence appeared in later interviews in which Sharon told them that she had heard low-flying planes during her short captivity. This hint will affect the course of the investigation later. While many in the area have begun to wonder, who is this masked threat? Another frightening question began to arise. Who will be next? It will take almost 2 years before this question is answered. The Canterbury, Victoria area is located on the outskirts of Melbourne. Located west of Ringwood and south of Lower Whip, this is another part of this vast suburban area, although much closer to the center of Melbourne itself. The Leno's family was quite wealthy, rented a house on the respectable and prestigious Monomite Avenue. This area was home to many Australian politicians and statesmen. Having arrived in Australia on business, the family was going to return to England in the very near future. In fact, They moved to this community in the Melbourne area on purpose for the safety of their children, and planned to return home in just a few days. On the 3rd of July, 1990, their illusion of security will be destroyed forever. Parents Brian and Rosemary were at a farewell party that was arranged for them. The family was planning to return to England the other day, so they left their 2 daughters alone at home for just a few hours. Shortly before midnight, 15-year-old Fiona and 13-year-old Nicole were woken up by an angry, imperious shout from an uninvited guest in a mask. He ordered Nicole to go into another room to pick up her school uniform from the Presbyterian Women's College where she studied, and he began to tie Fiona to her bed. These 2 lonely teenage girls had no chance to fight or run away from an attacker armed with a gun and a knife. And now that the eldest was tied up, the uninvited guest could easily leave. After informing Fiona that her father Brian would have to pay $25,000 for Nicole's safe return, this kidnapper took her and fled in the family's rented car, which was parked in the driveway. The abductor and the girl drove about a kilometer and then, presumably, moved to another parked car, which the criminal had prepared in advance. Just 20 minutes after the abduction, Brian and Rosemary Lines returned home to find that the entrance to the house was empty, and the front door was open. Surprise turned to fear when they found poor 15-year-old Fiona tied up on her own bed with a ransom note. The police found almost no evidence at the crime scene. Nicole's abduction to the attackers was carried out quickly and competently. They understood the complexity of the situation, since most missing persons cases were closed just a few hours after the initial abduction. Unlike the abduction of Sharon Wills, Nicole was not returned later that day, or even the next day. About 36 hours after the abduction, her father Brian held a press conference at which he addressed the kidnapper and declared his readiness to fulfill all ransom demands. Unfortunately, the Hampton rapist, as he was now called, left behind only demands for money, but left no means for feedback. The investigation began to look into Brian's business dealings, suggesting that it might have something to do with his work. The police believed that this ransom was of a personal nature. Fortunately for poor Nicole and her family, she was found alive about 50 hours after the abduction. It happened on her 14th birthday. Found near a power station in Kew, not far from her home, Nicole was left by her abductor, dressed and wrapped in a blanket. The kidnapper left her near a communal station and told her to sit until he left. After that, she took off the blindfold from her eyes, which she had been wearing throughout her captivity, and then headed to the nearest house. It was about 2 o'clock in the morning, but she immediately called her father, who had not slept, and prayed for her safe return. Since he returned to the desecrated house on the 3rd of July, Nicole was able to tell investigators some details that were vital to their investigation. Notable among them was the approximate estimate of the height of the criminal, which was about 175 centimeters. She guessed this by comparing her height with the height of the attacker when he dragged her to the car during the abduction, and said that he was not much taller than her. She also reported that the suspect probably had reddish-brown hair. Nicole also revealed some important details that the police didn't know about yet. Description of her abductor's house and car. Although the description she gave was quite simple, it was important, especially after it became known how she found out about it. Apparently, Nicole was blindfolded during her incarceration, but she had a few seconds to catch a glimpse. This caused a threat from Cruel. "My freedom is worth more than your life," he told Nicole, which echoed the threat he voiced to Sharon Wills. Just like Sharon Wills, Nicole was washed before being released. Throughout her captivity, she was also forced to wear a collar attached to the abductor's bed, which undoubtedly fueled the fear and panic that she must have been experiencing all this time. It became known that the criminal was talking loudly with another person while Nicole was blindfolded in the bedroom, but there was no answer. Investigators weren't sure if that meant there was an accomplice or someone else, but it's likely that this was just one of his many distractions. A few months after the Leno's family returned home to their native England, Nicola told investigators that she remembered hearing the sound of a low-flying plane, the same as the one that Sharon had previously reported. For investigators, This meant that the suspect lived in the vicinity of the nearby Tula Marine Airport, most likely on the way of his flight. Now the investigator had an approximate height of the suspect, as well as detailed sketches of his house, the salons of his car, and ideas about where he lived. But, unfortunately, the worst was yet to come. John and Phyllis Chan were two incredibly hard-working parents who worked about 18 hours a day to provide a luxurious life for their three daughters. Both parents, who emigrated to Australia, owned 3 restaurants in the Elton, Victoria area, as well as several other properties. Parents often didn't come home until midnight or so, running one of their 3 restaurants. They often left their 3 daughters at home from them, trusting their 13-year-old daughter Carmaine to look after the other 2. Cruel must have known about this, as detectives believe he has been stalking his victims for weeks or months, studying their habits. On April 13, 1991, horror and tragedy struck the Chan family in the form of Mr. Cruel himself. Despite the fact that the family lived in a cozy Templestowe neighborhood in Victoria, in a house that many would consider a mansion, they were not immune from the fear of a maniac. It was Saturday. It's usually a very busy day for the Chan's parents. Carmaine and her 2 younger sisters were on their own. And in the evening, the 3 sisters watched TV in Carmen's room. At about 8:40 p.m., Carmen and one of her sisters went to the family's kitchen to cook something to eat. When confronted with Mr. Rule, dressed in his traditional balaclava, along with a green and gray tracksuit, and holding a terrifying knife. "All I need is your money," Mr. Cruel told the 3 girls, shoving his 2 younger daughters into Carmen's closet. He said he only wanted Carmaine to show him where the money was and the bed in front of the closet, locking the 2 younger sisters, while he took Carmaine away. A few minutes later, the 2 younger sisters broke out of the makeshift prison and immediately called their father, who worked in the family restaurant. By the time the police arrived, they already knew what had happened. There was no sign of children in the big house. No garden toys, no play equipment, or anything like that. This attack was planned, and it could be seen from the driveway to the house. On the parked Toyota Camry of Phyllis Chan, the words "Repay Asian Drug Dealer" were written in large bold letters. More. Even more. Having studied the place of penetration of the criminal through the cut-through window lattice, the police were able to track his steps around the house, including escaping through the sliding glass door in the kitchen. With the help of search dogs, the police followed the trail of the kidnapper through the family garden and tennis court, at a distance of almost 300 meters to a vacant lot where he must have disappeared with Carmen in a waiting car. Hoping that their daughter would return home safely, both John and Phyllis Chan did not hold a press conference in about 72 hours. Phyllis Chan burst into tears while holding the clothes Carmaine was wearing the night she was abducted and begged to be returned home safely. A few days later, the Chan family posted an encrypted letter in a local newspaper, using a cipher that Carmaine could decipher. They offered a ransom in exchange for the safe return of their daughter. Even the Carmaine sisters wrote letters to the media, begging for their older sister's return. Unfortunately, days, weeks, and then months passed, and there was no word about Carmen's safe return. Even more sad. The investigation was overshadowed from the very beginning. The police destroyed the evidence in the Chan house. They went around the house looking for clues before investigators started looking for clues. Despite the fact that the police have been studying John Chan's personal and professional life for several months, looking for any possibility of criminal connections of his business enemies, the investigation soon focused on Mr. Rule. The inscription on Chan's car was nothing more than another distraction, designed solely to mislead investigators. Operation Spectrum, one of the largest operations in Australian history, was a multi-million-dollar event that took tens of thousands of people and hours, as well as many thousands of additional volunteer hours, offering a reward of $300,000 for any information leading to the capture of Mr. Cruel. The safe return of Carmaine Chan was paramount. Happy ending for her family. A year after Carmaine's abduction, on April 9, 1992, a man was walking his dog in the neighboring Thomas neighborhood. along Edgar's Creek when he came across a strange object. He bent down to look and was horrified by his discovery. When he returned home, he informed the authorities about the discovery. The police soon discovered what the man had found: a completely decomposed skeleton that soon turned out to be Carmen Chan. The autopsy showed that Carmen had been shot 3 times in the head, and judging by the decomposition of her skeleton, she had probably been dead for about a year. The theory of Carmen's mother, Phyllis, as to why Mr. Cruel killed Carmen has been preserved. Phyllis insists that Carmen was a stubborn girl who would have fought not to become a victim. She probably found out the identity of her abductor and paid a high price for it. Despite the fact that his life was torn apart, John Chan was acquitted of any possible wrongdoing and proved to be a worthy member of society. Operation Spectrum has now publicly linked Carmen Chan's murder to 3 previous sexual assaults or kidnappings, and placed the blame on the true culprit, the hitherto unidentified Mr. Cruel. The Spectrum process will last for several more years and will cost more than $4 million. A task force of 40 people checked more than 27,000 suspects, received more than 10,000 tips from the public, and searched more than 30,000 houses in the hope of finding at least one clue. Although the task force was never able to identify Mr. Rule, it arrested more than 70 people involved in child pornography, a seedy underworld in which, as many believed, Cruel was also involved. Both of his released abductees claimed to have seen or heard the sounds of a video camera at the foot of the bed where they were being held, and it was easy to believe that Mr. Cruel was involved in the child pornography trade. But, unfortunately, despite all the achievements during Operation Spectrum in the early 90s, Victoria Police was accused of corruption, which not only influenced later investigations into Mr. Cruel, but also made many claims of hiding the investigation data. In the end, in 1994, the Spectrum operation was curtailed, and with it any potential leads on Mr. Cruel. Over the years, there have been several theories about Mr. Cruel's identity and his possible fate. No future crimes will be attributed to him, but investigators may have flagged Mr. Cruel's previous crimes. Although they believe that the kidnapping and murder of Carmen Chan was his last crime in the Victoria area, there are potentially up to a dozen attacks on children in the mid-80s that remain unsolved, and almost all of them have a few details in common with the kidnappings of Mr. Cruel. But the police refused to disclose details of these previous attacks or the alleged links of the maniac with them. Another theory was Mr. Cruel's alleged connections to Victoria's school system. All 4 attacks and kidnappings occurred during the school holidays, which leads many to believe that Mr. Cruel was an employee of a local school. This is also consistent with the consciousness that both Nicole Linus and Carmen Chan attended the same school, Presbyterian Women's College, and Mr. Cruel asked Nicole to take her school uniform with her. This would have called into question his involvement in the Sharon Wills case, since he addressed her by name on the night she was abducted. Further interviews with his 2 living abductees revealed that he liked to call them missions and imagined that they were married. It is very possible that this monster, a man who preyed on children in the most depraved way, spent his working hours with them. In 2000, more than 20 years after the initial kidnappings and attacks, a new investigation was launched to find out the details and identity of the perpetrator. The Apollo Task Force was launched in the hope that new technologies and investigative methods would be able to provide an answer that previous detectives could not find. Unfortunately, to the great displeasure of the task force itself, many of the case materials were incorrectly filed, were in disarray, or simply disappeared. In fact, one of the vital clues that could have led to Mr. Cruel's doorstep, a piece of duct tape that had bound one of his victims, was missing. The police could potentially have used a piece of tape to reconstruct Mr. Cruel's DNA, but it disappeared from the evidence vault. This missing piece of important evidence, combined with Mr. Cruel's tactical abilities and his knowledge of forensic practices, led many to assume that he could have been involved in law enforcement. It is quite possible that he knew what the investigators would be looking for. Therefore, he did everything possible to purge his victims of any DNA and subsequently remove important evidence. One can only guess whether corruption or incompetence was the reason for the disappearance of these essential evidence in this case. However, in the year 2013, one suspect was detained, which could eventually be Mr. Cruel. Robert Keith Knight was a man who made a living working with children. He was arrested twice for various crimes against children. In 1996, Knight was arrested and convicted of sexual assault on minors, after which many of his other victims made statements against him. According to the original investigators of Operation Spectrum, Robert Keith Knight was one of their suspects. Investigators were unable to exclude him from the case. He remained in the spotlight throughout the subsequent investigations, and the time of Mr. Cruel's attack coincided with his release from the criminal record after 1980. After being released from prison on charges of 1990 on pornography, and was later detained during an investigation by the Victoria State Police. He pleaded guilty on the basis of irrefutable evidence and, while awaiting trial, jumped from the railing of the second floor of the prison and crashed to his death. So he's just one of many suspects that Victoria Police have to this day. And they refuse to release much more information. More recently, many people have begun to put forward the theory that Mr. Cruel could have been involved in the abduction of a 13-year-old schoolgirl, Bung Sarabin, in 2011. The circumstances are very similar, but there is practically no evidence. At the moment, Mr. Cruel's case is still open, and he remains one of Australia's most wanted criminals. If you like this video, please like it and write a comment. Currently, this is the only possible and non-material support for the authors. Thank you all. See you soon.